One of the most contentious parts of the landlord-tenant relationship is access to the rental unit. When can the landlord enter the tenant's unit, for what purposes, the notice requirements, and what are the rights of the tenants? Neither one really knows what the Nebraska Landlord Tenant Act says regarding this situation, and we're going to clarify that in this video. Hey everyone, if we're meeting for the first time, my name is Vojchehoske and welcome to Nebraska Landlords YouTube channel. This video is sponsored by that subscribe button so you know what to do here. So when can a landlord or their authorized representative, such as a maintenance person, etc., when can they enter into that tenant's unit? And here's the thing, Nebraska Revised Statute 76-14-23, it has done a great job of outlining this so everybody can easily understand when a landlord can get in, what's the requirements for the notice, and what are the tenants' their rights when it comes to the landlord's access. There are 4 parts to this section we're gonna cover. We're gonna specifically talk about for what reasons a landlord may enter the tenant's unit. We're going to talk about the notice requirements that the landlord has to give to the tenant. We're going to talk about emergency situations, and then what are the tenant's rights. So let's talk about the reasons under the statute a landlord may enter that tenant's unit. Now, a landlord or their authorized representative, again, such as a maintenance person, they have a right to go in to inspect that unit. And I want to talk about a couple of things when it comes to inspections. It is very common, particularly in the property management community, that they're going to do a whole unit inspection. That means they're going to go through the drawers, the cabinets, they're going to go to each room, the closets, to do a whole inspection of that unit. It's typically done on an annual basis. Now, landlords, managers, anything more frequent than a year, you're kind of starting to get yourself into that harassment jeopardy area. So I suggest the industry standard is annual. So make sure you're doing it annually. There may be other times, specifically in specific areas of that unit, you may need to go inspect for insurance purposes or whatever. But you deal with those on a case-by-case case-by-case situation. But inspections are very common in our industry. So tenants, if you're going to be there more than a year, you have to expect that that landlord or that manager is going to come in on an annual basis. The landlord has a right to go in to effect repairs. They have a right to go in to make improvements to that unit when they have either been promised to you as a tenant or it's part of the maintenance plan of the property. The landlord has a right to go in and show that unit to prospective future tenants, to prospective purchasers. They have a right to show that property to, let's say, a real estate agent, because maybe the landlord's thinking about selling the property and they're going to get an agent in there to conduct some kind of analysis. Maybe an insurance representative needs to get in there to look at the breaker box, etc. There are times when people like insurance adjusters, etc., have to get in there, and they're permitted to do so under 76-14-23. Also, the landlord has a right to go into that unit to show that unit to contractors to obtain bids or to allow that contractor to conduct work. Again, understand this, tenants. Under the Nebraska Landlord Tenant Act, the landlord has a duty and a responsibility to maintain the material condition of that property. And so they have to have access to your unit so they can make those repairs, etc. One other thing I want to talk about here, because I do get frequent calls on this. It is lawful for the landlord or their authorized representative to change those monthly furnace filters. I know a lot of tenants don't like that, but they have a right to do it. But caution, landlords, if you're going to do this, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, you should, because even when you give, and we all know that when you give, even if you give the filters to the tenants, they never change them most of the time. And so there's a reason why you want to do it, but this is important. It's a point A to point B type exercise. You enter at point A, you go directly to point B, which is the furnace, change the filters, and then exit back at point A. It does not give you the authority to wander around the unit, to check out how well of a housekeeper that tenant is. Point A to point B. If you don't do that and you get nailed by a nanny cam, you might have to answer some difficult questions if they file a harassment suit. Now, the next part of 76-14-23 I want to talk about is entry requirements. So this did change in August of 2021. So prior to August of 2021, this part of the statute read that the landlord had to give a 1-day notice to the tenant. And there was always this vagueness about it. What does 1 day mean? In fact, some people took it to mean that when the clock struck midnight, that was a new day. So August 2021, a new standard came into effect, and I think it was good because it brought clarity. The landlord must give the tenant a 24-hour notice prior to entering into that property, and the entry must be at reasonable times. Reasonable times is the industry standard is Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. That is the reasonableness standard, if you will, that we basically in the industry we follow. Now, certainly the landlord and the tenant can agree to alternative times, and that's fine as long as they both agree. Absent that agreement, it's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. Now, notice requirements, the actual notice that the landlord gives to the tenants. There were some changes as well to that. And landlords, listen up, very important here. Number one, that notice must be written, a written notice to the tenant. So what does that mean? That means paper. Paper. You must give a piece of paper, a written notice to your tenant, a 24-hour notice of your intention to enter their dwelling. Now, having said that, it is very common, particularly in the property management community, that they will put into the lease that an alternative means of notification. Usually it's email, and that is very, very appropriate as long as there's an agreement there, and that's typically why we want to put it into the lease agreement. So if you're landlords, if you want to do it by email, make sure it's in your lease agreement, but absent some kind of an agreement, then we're defaulting back to the good old piece of paper, all right? Secondly, your written notice must include an estimated time of entry. You can state that as a specific time, like I'll be in at 2 p.m., or you can put a blocked time period, such as noon to 2, noon to 4. My recommendation to avoid any appearance of, harassment here, I would do it in 2-hour time blocks, no more than 4 hours. That's just my personal recommendation. But you're going to have to make that determination. But you must include an estimated time of entry. You must also include in that written notice the itemized list of the work you're going to perform in that unit. And lastly, you must include an estimated time when you believe that work will be completed. These are not options. These are mandated under 76-14-23. Now, what happens if you don't do your notice properly? Well, you open yourself up to harassment charges by your tenant, and you could find yourself in legal jeopardy. So this is a very simple, easy requirement to comply with. Just do a one-time, notice draft, and then you have it there, and then you can change the details unit by unit. So it's just a template. Create a template and move on. Next thing I want to talk about that's discussed in 76-14-23 are emergency situations. There are times when emergencies arise and the landlord or their representative have to get in there immediately. The law does allow for a waiver of the 24-hour notice if it's a true bona fide emergency. It also allows for the landlord or their representative to go in at unreasonable times, such as 2 a.m., as long as it's an emergency situation. And I think common sense is at play here. If a pipe is broken and water is spraying all over the place, that's an emergency situation. And the law basically says you have a right to go in and secure or make the repair to prevent any further damage to the property, or if it poses some kind of risk to the tenant or other residents within that building. That's considered an emergency situation. So again, use common sense here and remember bona fide, legitimate emergencies You can waive the 24-hour notice, and you have a right to immediate access even at unreasonable times. And then last but not least, I want to talk about what are those tenants' rights? I get a lot of calls from tenants, and they're upset because their landlord is going to come in and do something, a maintenance or an inspection or whatever. And they'll say, listen, I don't want that landlord in here unless I'm present, or I don't want that landlord to come in except between times of 5 p.m. and 7 p.m., or I don't want my landlord in here at all. Well, and back up here a little bit, I understand why a tenant may not want their landlords in there legitimately. I have had calls, I've seen video where tenants have showed me where their landlord comes in and they're going through their dresser underwear drawer and stuff like that. I get it. I understand that. And I sympathize to a certain extent. However, we always have to revert back to what does the law say? And under the Nebraska Landlord Tenant Act, the tenant has absolutely no right to place requirements on the landlord's access to that property. None. So the tenant can request that they be present. However, the landlord does not have to comply. They can go in as long as it meets the standard in 76-14-23. You cannot require that they come between certain times, and you certainly can't say no. I know a lot of tenants don't like it, but that's what the law says. Anyways, that's why it's so important that you stay informed of what's going on. The best way to do that is to join our mailing list or join our Facebook page. How do you do that? Right here. Check out this video right here. See y'all in the next video.